Hello and welcome to Leviathan News. It is April 11th, a couple of days away from tax filing here in the States, but we have a double header today for our legal eagles out there. There has been two major cases that have come up in the past couple of days, and we're going to be talking about them today. And overall, it's just a general sense of a war that the U.S. government is carrying out against open source developers. And so today we have on the Chief Legal Officer from the DeFi Education Fund. That's Amanda Tuminelli here. The DeFi Education Fund is a nonpartisan research and advocacy group based in the United States. They help people like the government and other parties understand DeFi, help get regulatory clarity on the technology, and help protect the rights of everyone in this digital market. So Amanda, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We also have my co-host DeFi advisor, as always. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you? Nice to be on.
And our favorite dumb ape, Mr. Alex Golubitsky.
Favorite indeed.
So this, I would have to say that, so we're going to start out and talk about the Roman Storm case, which is why I wanted Amanda to come on. But we're also going to talk about the Uniswap Wells notice that came in hot yesterday and surprised a lot of people in the market. Both are attempts to quash open source development, or at least put up some barriers that people might not want to work inside the United States and publish code anymore. And the kind of broad idea here is that there's questions of liability when it comes to open source development of these the issues of publishing code, right? So if you put out code and somebody uses it for a nefarious action in the future, especially people that are on the OFAC list or the SDN list, who's liable for that, even if it's years down the road? And the worrying part about all of this is that the government's taking this pretty extreme position that people should know in the future how things are going to be used, and that liability should be applicable for open source developers in the code that they're being published. And so that's why I wanted to have Amanda on today. So Amanda, thank you for publishing this amicus brief. I thought it was really interesting to read through it. Maybe before that, we can just talk about why did you specifically, the DeFi Education Fund, decide to get involved in the case of Roman Storm?
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's actually because of one of the key issues that you just hit on. So we, and I can back up and give some details about the indictment, but what we saw, this theme that came out of the indictment here, is the criminalization of the development of software for when that software is used by a third-party bad actor years after the software was created, and even when the creator of the software cannot do anything to change whether somebody has access to their software. So that theme was very alarming to us. I think that in many ways, this is the most important case in crypto that not enough people are talking about, because it creates massive, unprecedented liability for software developers. And you know, this is the DOJ. This is we're talking about a liberty interest here. This is not just a civil monetary penalty. At the end of the day, we're talking about people being accused of a crime and potentially going to jail for that crime. So the stakes are very high. And when we looked at the indictment, as I said, it was an unprecedented theory of liability. We did a review of many, many cases alleging sanctions violations and money laundering violations, and we did not find a similar theory in any indictment in the past. So that's why the stakes were so high. That's why we felt like we needed to get involved.
So why exactly is this the most important case in crypto and DeFi right now?
Because I think it would massively expand liability for developers. So if this case continues and the government is allowed to proceed on this theory. So right now, this is just the motion to dismiss the indictment, right? So we're pre-trial. There will be more development of the record. There will be a trial, most likely. So if the government is successful on this theory, then that sets a precedent that software developers could be liable for third parties' use of their software years into the future to commit a crime, even when developers have no ability to prevent that person from using their software.
So I always thought that like code is free speech. It's perfectly legal to write code. It's perfectly legal to deploy code. So how is the government getting to what you guys say, this novel theory of what the government's pursuing here?
Exactly.
In this
You thought
case?
so, Sam. You thought so. You thought so.
Yeah, like how is liability coming into this when it seems pretty clear that this should be a free speech issue?
So I obviously agree with you. I think we're ideologically aligned on that. And I would just say that Coin Center did a fabulous amicus brief specifically talking about the free speech issue. We coordinated with the Blockchain Association and Coin Center to make sure we covered all of the issues in this case with the limited page numbers that we had. But I would say that the government is blowing right past a speech argument here, because their theory in the indictment is that the Tornado Cash founders together with others formed a conspiracy. And the object of the conspiracy, there's like 3 different conspiracy alleged in the indictment. The conspiracies are supposedly to commit money laundering violations, to violate sanctions, and to run an unlicensed money transmitter business. So in order to prove a conspiracy, you have to show that people agreed to do the object of the conspiracy. So in this case, they're not really wrestling with having to prove the underlying violations, meaning they don't even have to prove that money laundering occurred. The government's burden is to prove that people agreed to commit money laundering. And their theory for this is by saying that by packaging together the various distinct parts of the Tornado Cash ecosystem and calling them a service. So they're saying the protocol, the UI, governance, that all, and the Torn token all together, packaged together inappropriately, is a service. And through that service, there is this supposed agreement to commit crimes in various ways. And I think it's another way that the indictment is dangerous, right, is looping together component parts that actually do not have any control over each other, that do not even collaborate. So that's how they're getting there in the government's view.
So I thought it was interesting in the brief that you guys really tried to separate the protocol from the interface from the token, and essentially by focusing on saying that, you know, the interface and the token don't really matter, right? Once the code is deployed, you know, that front end, that interface could be shut down, right? The token really has no point in this. The code is going to work either way. I mean, Tornado Cash is still operating today. People can still use it. It doesn't really matter what the government does, even if everyone is found guilty in the case and the government gets everything that it's asking for here in this indictment. The Tornado Cash is still going to run in perpetuity, and there's nothing that could be done at this point to shut it down other than completely shutting down the Ethereum network.
That's exactly right. And I think it was reported that somebody used the protocol not that long ago to send money to BlackRock, right? So now BlackRock has to wrestle with the fact that they could have blocked property in their possession. But I think that your point is a good one, which is that there is nothing that the government can do through sanctions or otherwise to stop people from using the protocol. But most importantly, there's nothing the founders could do to stop people from using the protocol. So once they published this immutable smart contract protocol years ago, there was nothing they could do to stop any bad actor from using the protocol to commit a crime. And that's why the liability for anything should lie with the bad actors themselves and not with the creators of the protocol.
Right. So you write in the brief that there's 2 main theories of liability, right? And first is this IEEPA. That's the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. What exactly is that?
That's basically the sanctions law. So there's different sanctions regimes. At issue in this case is the North Korean sanctions regime, but IEEPA is the statute that says that the president has authority to issue sanctions and prevent U.S. persons from transacting or exporting goods to sanctioned entities.
Right. So the government's essentially claiming that if you publish code and it's later used by a sanctioned entity, So even if the developers didn't have any intent or direct engagement with the sanctioned party, in this case, specifically with Tornado Cash, right? Like the Roman Storm wasn't out meeting with the North Koreans, helping them, teaching them how to deposit into Tornado Cash, and then facilitating, like taking possession of the crypto that was deposited into those contracts. That wasn't happening. I mean, the Tornado Cash code was deployed. Potentially it was managed on the front end that they ran, but the government is claiming that there's criminal liability here for actions of a sanctioned party in a smart contract that is completely trustless, has no outside dependencies, and really is not dependent on the developers once it's been published.
That's exactly right. And we are limited on a motion to dismiss the indictment. Roman Storm's counsel is limited to the facts in the indictment. But as you just said, there is no allegation in the indictment that the Tornado Cash founders in any way directly engaged with North Korea, marketed to North Korea, did anything to solicit usage of the protocol by North Korea. There's no connection made whatsoever. It's this theory of like passive connection where there is no intent whatsoever. And the government needs to show that there is a willful violation here. They need to show that the Tornado Cash founders willfully violated IEPA, which means they have to show that they did something knowing that the end result of their conduct would result in a sanctions violation. And that's just simply absent from the indictment. And in our research, we looked for any other case where software was at issue. And we only found 2 cases in the country, not just in New York, in the country, where software was at issue. And in both of those cases, the software at issue was directly marketed to the sanctioned entity. Like the defendant in question went to the sanctioned country or sought out a sanctioned entity and made the software for them specifically. That is not the case here. There's nothing close to that kind of allegation in the indictment.
So
it sounds a bit like they want to be able to prosecute and regulate people for building stuff that might be used, not just intended to be used. And I think that's like, I'm no lawyer or something like that, but it seems like it's a huge difference. Like if you build something that you intend that will be used for something and only that thing, and it's malicious, or is it just like, okay, it's a part of the deal and it might, but it also serves so many other functions.
That's exactly right. And the indictment even notes that the founders burned the private key. So there was truly nothing they could do by the point at which North Korea was supposedly using the protocol. There was nothing that they could do at that time to change anything about the protocol and prevent that from happening. And the indictment even notes that they tried to put a compliance tool on the front end, but there were news reports that it was easily evaded. So it raises this question of, for the creator of any technology, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to foresee every possible use forever of your software or your technology and do what? Like make it completely impossible and it actually might even be impossible to do that, but try to make it impossible for a sanctioned entity to use your technology. It's just an insane expansion of the law. It just doesn't exist in the law at this point.
Yeah. And I think there was even questions like, wasn't the judge asking Roman Storm, like, why didn't you implement compliance in the contract when you deployed it? Or
are you might be thinking of the case against Alexei Pertsev, which has proceeded, in the Netherlands, it's proceeded past the point where we are in the United States procedurally. So yeah, there were those questions asked. And I think even according to the US indictment, they did try to implement some compliance tool, but that's only on the front end. And as we know, that does not prevent anybody from using the protocol itself.
I have a question. Does the government's theory about the liability of the developers of Tornado Cash here, could that, and maybe this is just like too far gone into paranoia, but could that same theory be used to say that there's some type of money laundering liability if you, for example, run an Ethereum validator or or something along those lines that's more basic to the infrastructure of the blockchain?
Unfortunately, I think it does expand that far if the way it's written in the indictment is actually accepted by a court. I think that it is saying that the creator of any technology, it doesn't have to be software, it could be more infrastructure based, it could be software only. If you just create that thing and have it run, and then a third party bad actor uses it, you're responsible for that, according to the government here. I think it's a bit different in validators because, they could be asked to prevent certain people from, or they could be asked to prevent certain transactions from going through in a way that the developer of an immutable smart contract protocol can't. But that nuance isn't even, there isn't room for that nuance in the government's theory.
So looking back at history, the closest analogy I can see of what's happening here was these FX shops that ran for a long time in the like 1990s, early 2000s, essentially coming into the kind of late early 2010s, where you had all these offshore brokerages running these FX shops at the time. And the CTFC aggressively went after pretty much every single one of those and shut them down. Hundreds of brokerages shut down. But in all of those cases, you have an entity which is run by people on a day-to-day basis, has a management team, has an actual structure, and is able to implement those compliance procedures if they wanted to. And so the government was very successful after going after those actors. We don't really see unlicensed FX shops running anymore. They've pretty much been all shut down. But with this is a little bit different, where the code itself doesn't have a managing controller. It doesn't have a team that's actively working on it, and yet they're trying to pursue that same type of heavy-handed enforcement against it.
I definitely see the parallel to what you're talking about. I think that you hit on the key difference, though. In those cases, there was a centralized entity. And I would also just say that here we're talking about the DOJ, so we're talking about criminal liability, so the stakes are even higher. But I think you're right to focus on the difference that Tornado Cash is decentralized. It doesn't have one centralized entity. And the government may try to package it together and say it's a service because there's all these component parts working together, but they have to prove that. Like, they will have to, if they survive the motion to dismiss the indictment, they will have to prove that in fact there was a centralized actor calling the shots, responsible for all of the conduct. So that could be a key difference here.
So these questions of sanctions butting up against questions of First Amendment rights. This probably is the kind of bellwether for how the industry is able to move forward over the next decade. I know the government is taking this stance. Obviously, they're protecting national security. No one wants to see funds being routed towards the North Koreans to fund their rockets or nuclear programs or anything from here in the States. What is the line or kind of hopeful outcome in all of this? Is it to essentially shift the burden to choke points where those funds that are stolen could be essentially frozen, or to cut off the fiat access points? I don't really see the impact having the desirable outcomes that they want here. Just because even if they get everything they want here in this Roman Storm case, it's not really going to change anything on the code side. People can still deploy code. We might have this in the future as well too. And I don't see how this changes anything except giving the government carte blanche to go after developers.
Yeah, I mean, I echo your thoughts here that, of course, we don't want to support the financing of terrorism, the financing of sanctioned entities. Nobody's saying that. And I think just injecting North Korea into the case is such a lightning rod that people have such strong reactions to even just hearing that. But I would make a comparison to the SWIFT system, right? Traditional finance, SWIFT system. If you go on, and Coin Center makes this point really well in their brief, if you go onto the SWIFT system's website, and you go to their sanctions compliance section, it says that the SWIFT system is just software. It is just a messaging service that sends messages back and forth to interconnected banking systems. And while they do their best to comply with sanctions, the burden is on the financial institutions connected to SWIFT to prevent sanctioned entities from using it. And in the past, SWIFT always SWIFT has had more control over who accesses their system than the developer of an immutable smart contract protocol. So in the past, SWIFT has been able to block a bank that doesn't comply with sanctions or block some entry point to North Korea. But when that has happened, when the SWIFT system has been used to commit a crime, the government has used good old-fashioned police work to pursue the bad actor, to pursue the North Korean developer or hacker at issue, and did not go after the operators or developers of the SWIFT system. And I think that's what should happen here, right? We should be held to crypto should be held to the exact same standards that the traditional financial system has enjoyed, which is putting the liability on the bad actors themselves and not developers of software or developers of infrastructure.
And what sort of?
I actually think, sorry, Sam, I actually think that crypto is actually enforcing itself a higher standards of so many of our enabling people to execute their liberties. But some people that really if we're honest, some people don't enjoy that fact. Some people are sitting in some very powerful positions, and your point about SWIFT having that ability back then, that's the whole point. People don't the people who are pushing all this kind of stuff. They want the power. They just don't want them in any other hands other than their own. And I really think that. And also, I want to touch on one small other thing. I'm pretty sure all of you are American citizens, but this is a kind of global issue, So it's on my side of the world, it's what does it matter what people even if it's in America, what they think about it? It's a part of a human right in a way, everyone should have this kind of liberty in a way. So it's even much broader than that,
I would say that the use of OFAC to pursue individuals extraterritorially is entirely possible. There are multiple agreements between countries in terms of extradition that can be used here. It doesn't really matter if you're in Israel or Europe or somewhere else. If those countries have bilateral agreements with the United States, if the government's theories here on liability are able to proceed and essentially be weaponized against open source developers, there's really no limit to the power that the U.S. government would have to pursue pretty much anybody anywhere in the world, unless they're essentially living in one of these OFAC sanctioned countries.
Exactly, and it's a joint interest of people outside the U.S. As well. What's going to happen with these kinds of stuff? But I actually also think that another implication of all of this is how can a builder build in the U.S.? You really have to be patriotic in a way in order to keep building in the U.S. because they you're being interfered constantly.
So I wanted to ask, what spillover will this have for other industries outside of crypto if this interpretation is allowed to be held?
I think it affects the creators of technology in every industry. I just don't know that we're going to see the government pursue creators of technology in other industries because that hasn't happened yet, but it really would set that kind of precedent because there's no difference. Taken this theory to its logical ends, there's no difference. If I create something that looks more like Adobe software that creates PDFs, right? But that is somehow later used by a sanctioned entity to do something. Why is that any different than what the Tornado Cash developers have done here? I think the issue is that the government just simply doesn't like that they created privacy preserving software, so they have chosen to go after it. But you're right to say that there is no limit. It could be applied outside of crypto.
I'm kind of curious on that point. You know, one of the things as DeFi Advisor was touching on, one of the real benefits of using Ethereum or blockchain in general is the ability to transact freely and globally, you know, in seconds. But you know, one thing that I think gets missed, and this comes up sort of more broadly in money laundering, is that we've always had the ability to transact anonymously in cash, right? I could go right now and leave a bunch of cash in a duffel bag in the dumpster behind Colesville Road or whatever, and somebody could come pick it up, and they're not going to know who that came from and who picked it up. There's always been this sort of limiting factor, though, with cash transactions, that it has to be a physical transaction. And that I think has allowed sort of the financial surveillance regime to just be completely focused on electronic funds transfers, right? Because that can be done across the globe. But with blockchain, you can combine the anonymity of a cash transaction with the sort of global reach of an electronic transaction. And I wonder, again, maybe this is just a paranoid fever dream, but I wonder to what extent this is just what we're seeing in the Tornado Cash case is just a symptom of how big a threat blockchain technology is to the financial surveillance system, and whether we can actually really even have financial surveillance as it's been sort of formulated in the United States in a way that allows actually blockchain to flourish, and whether this is sort of the first step to just saying, okay, you cannot actually use this technology in the US.
I mean, I'm with you. I think that is the larger question at issue here. I'm sure you guys, when you get into Uniswap, will talk about this. I think that there is a universally consistent US government approach to crypto right now, and that is to make it extremely unhospitable for blockchain companies and Web3 companies to exist in the United States. And I think we are seeing that in every regulator, the DOJ, the White House. So I tend to agree with you, and I think that the Storm case is an extreme example of it, because we're talking about criminal liability. I think that they are acting in concert to try to make this industry not able to flourish here. But as it was said earlier, I think that it's so worldwide at this point. It's not. Even if they make it so difficult to build in the United States, people will be building everywhere. So I really don't think that they can win that.
So I'm just a bit flabbergasted by all of this.
That's how they roll, Sam. That's how they do it.
Yeah,
that's how they do it, man. It's unbelievable, but that's how they actually do it. And they're so used to the fact that we let them get away with it. Like, we let them get away with it in the real world so many times, and they're always sure that they can keep pushing it and pushing it, just like every relationship, like on any aspect in nature, but I really think that Amanda has a very important point about like the significance of this kind of case. Like, this has so many broader implications, and the way that the legal system works, it's always like with precedents. Oh yeah, on that time we said that, so now we should start like saying it all the time. And it's so easy, it's so hard to like overturn stuff, because it's so easy for whoever's deciding to just lean on whoever decided first. And but like both on this case and the Alexei Pertsev case, and the stuff we're gonna probably talk about soon with Uniswap, it's really important for us to take a stand and to really like try to push this thing forward, because it will affect like our literally our freedom and the whole reason that we're in it. Because the only kind of blockchain they will let us use is their own private blockchain. Like that's the only time they will actually be satisfied,
KYC Fed chain.
Yeah, well, I think that, I'm not sure if we're about to go into Uniswap stuff, but before we do, I think it's really important to point out that what Amanda and DEF are fighting here with the Tornado Cash case, in my mind, that's the final boss, right? In terms of everything with Uniswap and the SEC and the CFTC, these are all important issues, but that can all sort of be cabineted even within the world of blockchain, right? You can say, okay, if they have some very onerous like permitting regime to like do certain things, you can live with that. But what OFAC sanctions represent and what the Treasury, this type of Treasury regulation, I think means for blockchain is actually existential. That the end result of the government getting its way in the Tornado Cash case is that the technology itself becomes illegal.
You know, the thing that gives me hope and leaves me a bit optimistic is how the case against Philip Zimmerman back in the 90s went, and when they essentially went after PGP and open source encryption at the time. Very similar cases in this, where we're talking about code, free speech. The U.S. government had essentially banned any export of encryption by classifying it as a weapon or a dangerous munition. And you know, this one went through the courts. It took quite a long time, but eventually it came out that, you know, open source encryption is not illegal. To be able to publish it, to be able to host it, for people to use it. And in the end, the outcome came that, you know, even though the encryption works really well, people in SDN countries might use this encryption, it's still a First Amendment right to be able to publish this. And so I hope that ultimately we get the same type of outcome here for Roman Storm.
I will also just add an additional point of hope that this is currently pending in front of Judge Fela, who wrote the Risley v. Uniswap decision and recently wrote the Coinbase motion to dismiss opinion, which I know we probably take issues with part of that opinion. But I think what is positive about that is in the Risley v. Uniswap decision, she did a really great job of separating the component parts of the Uniswap ecosystem. And she separated token creators from the UI, from the protocol, and did a good job of making sure that the analysis on each of those parts was separate. So I would hope that she brings the same level of technological nuance to this case. And you know, at this point, she may be the judge with the most education on this on the bench right now. So I would say that is one additional point of hope.
I want to ask another.
We did have one question from Stephen Paley saying that he's sympathetic to the arguments here, but doesn't the Tornado Cash indictment focus on the conduct of the creators and not just the tech?
So I am not as familiar with the Zimmerman case, so I'm not going to talk about that. But I would say that the conduct, while the indictment makes certain allegations about the conduct of the creators here, I would say that if you go back and look at the time period, if you go back and look at the time period alleged for each conspiracy, and you look at what the indictment says the founders supposedly did during that time period, I do not think the indictment has actually alleged that the founders did something in the relevant time period that amounted to money laundering or violating sanctions. In the sanctions charge specifically, there is no allegation that the founders did anything to directly and actively engage with a sanctioned entity. So that's the key for me here.
Does the fact that we're so close to an election in the US gonna matter in some way and gonna affect this possibly?
Well, it could certainly change how the administrative treats crypto going forward if there is a change in the administration. So that is one way that it could change.
Yeah, no, I mean more in the way of like, is there a chance that if someone that there will be like pressures to take decisions earlier because they're not sure like who's gonna win the elections and stuff like that?
I don't know. I think that's a matter of opinion here as to whether like Chair Gensler is trying to get a bunch of stuff on the record before he is no longer chair or not. I'm not sure how much he cares about his successor continuing the actions he's starting, or I don't know what motivates him anymore at this point, other than just stamping out the industry.
It's hard to kind of speculate as to what the SEC is thinking, but you know, I mean, looking at like something like the Wells notice to Uniswap, let's assume let's assume it's a foregone conclusion that the case is actually going to be filed. We're still 2 months away probably from that happening, maybe 6 weeks if they rush. And then that puts us into, June. We're going to have, a lot of briefings on the motion to dismiss. We're not going to really get any substantive decisions until the next administration on this anyway. So like a lot of this stuff I think could really change if we get a change administratively, in the SEC and more broadly speaking in Treasury. But it always strikes me that with the sanction stuff, it's doubly difficult because you're also dealing with the boogeyman of terrorism. And I'm not trying to be like pro-terrorism or diminish the threat that terrorism poses, but we've all lived in this country for the last 2 decades, right? And we understand how the government can use terrorism in a way to like make something seem that's not actually related to terrorism, make it seem like it's worse. And I do think that is what we're seeing with the Tornado Cash case, is that I think the government would have a very difficult time maintaining the Tornado Cash case without this added fact that, North Korea used it, right? If it was just sort of some run-of-the-mill financial crime that people are, sort of whatever about, then it's not it's not as big it wouldn't be as big an issue. And I think that regardless of who's in the White House, we're going to run into that. We're going to run into, this is going to be viewed as hey, we have to have financial surveillance. We have to be able to control finances as a way to prevent the absolute like worst things that we can imagine from happening. And I think it's we can argue, we all here understand like the different technical arguments and how this relates to free speech and all of that. But I think for a lot of people, they're just going to hear terrorism and be like, well, you got to give them what they want.
Yeah. So, Amanda, thank you for joining us today. I know that the questions here are very broad, and what we don't want to see, at least is my opinion, is the government given more ambiguous powers and selective enforcement to be able to go after who they choose, right? Because that's essentially how if this theory is able to essentially move forward and be used to prosecute Roman Storm, the question is not like who it's applicable to. It's essentially a question of when does the government want to apply this, and how selectively do they want to use this? And because of the ambiguity baked into the theory, it's essentially carte blanche without limits. And that's really the risk that we're talking about today.
I totally agree. Thank you for having me. It was a great discussion. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Amanda.
Amen.
And so the other big topic that we want to talk about today, and why we have Alex here, is the Wells notice that Uniswap Labs received yesterday. Uniswap Labs is the kind of, I want to call it like sister company that is the developers of Uniswap. Hayden Adams came out and said that they had received this notice. Wells notice is essentially the government telling Uniswap Labs that there's going to be an indictment soon, that they are going to charge them with certain violations. It's not really clear what those violations are yet, but it did raise quite a kerfuffle amongst crypto Twitter yesterday. So, Alex, what should we really be preparing ourselves here for?
Well, it's hard to say, right? Because the existence of the Wells notice just kind of indicates that the litigation is going to be filed, right? And we don't know what the substance of the litigation is going to be based on the existence of the Wells notice. I think that I'm looking at 3 different things with respect to what the complaint contains. One is, I think the one that everybody is very on the edge of their seat about, right, is going to be the Exchange Act claim, right? Is Uniswap, either through its front end or through the smart contracts it deployed, operating an unregistered securities exchange? That's I think that's like the big one, right? But and in a certain sense, we can get into why. I think that's probably the hardest case for the government to make. But there's other issues, right? One, I think that the other one that is almost as interesting, especially if you're in the industry, is whether or not the Uni token was part of some sort of securities issuance, right, or an investment contract that constitutes an issuance of a security. And for that one, I actually think the government has a pretty good argument that there's some securities type elements, if you will, to the Uni token. And I'm trying not to be colored by the fact that I'm not the world's biggest fan of the Uni token, but even setting that aside, I think the government has a pretty good argument there. And then the third one that I think we could see is whether the front end specifically makes Uniswap, or really Uniswap Labs specifically, an investment advisor under the 1940 Act, and that we pretty much saw that theory like explicitly rejected, and I think we even talked about it on here in the Coinbase with respect to the Coinbase wallet. It's pretty much the same argument, but the SEC doesn't usually just take no for an answer one time. Like, they gotta take a couple runs at it, and so I think we could see an investment advisors type claim as well.
So taking a look at the blog post that Uniswap put out in the immediacy of this Wells notice reporting, they essentially put out 3 arguments to bolster their case against this coming Wells notice. The first was that there's no authority for Congress, and they said that the SEC only has jurisdiction over securities and not assets classified as investment, or such as assets legally classified as investment contracts. So they brought up the Ripple case, that most of these tokens that are out there, ETH, BTC, they're not securities, they're commodities, and it's entirely okay to trade commodities in a peer-to-peer way. Also brings up this Risley versus Uniswap Labs decision that set out that it essentially said in the decision that Congress needs to decide this, and that this is outside the SEC's purview. The second thing that they brought up was that there's no exchange or broker claim. So even if the Howey test did not foreclose the SEC arguments they write, the protocol, the web app, and the wallet would still not meet the legal definitions of a securities exchange or brokers. And this was brought up in the SEC versus Coinbase case. And so they essentially say that, like, the SEC knows that their legal definitions do not capture self-custodial on-chain decisions. And that's why they proposed this new exchange rule that hasn't come into force yet. But they say that even if it came into force, it would probably be shot down later on. And then they talk about the Uni token as well, too.
Yeah, I mean, so, and I think that these are all good arguments. And to be frank, I think Uniswap's going to do a better job of making those arguments than I will. But what I will say about this is that, like, in this kind of situation, it's important to just kind of take a step out of the echo chamber a little bit and realize that what they're doing, what Uniswap is citing here, is not necessarily going to be precedential in their case. It's not precedential now. We're talking about district court decisions. I could easily see both the Coinbase case and the Uniswap case eventually working their way up to the Supreme Court, and us having some actual, law on this. But the reality is that the SEC, I mean, attacking specifically the token issue, the SEC's had a lot of success going after token issuers. In fact, I can't think of one that they've lost. I might be missing one, but it's the SEC. They do a pretty good job making the argument that a lot of tokens are issued as part of a securities transaction. And you know why it's an easy argument for them to make? Because a lot of projects issue tokens to raise capital.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a controversial statement to anybody who's in crypto or DeFi, right? We all know this happens. I don't think it's a bad thing, but it is the fact that this is what a lot of tokens are used for. And I think that, like, it's what the Uni token was used for. They had some interesting mechanics, if you will, in terms of how the token was distributed, some innovative mechanics that were copied, and maybe people sort of assume that they're, you know, they have some legal ability, but that's what the tokens are for, and that's really what the Howey test is trying to get at is hey, if you're raising capital, you know, for an entrepreneurial effort and telling the people who you're raising capital from, I'm giving you a thing that's going to increase in value based on my efforts. That's an investment contract, and the law is, I think, very clear on that.
But
even though it was like airdropped and they didn't like get paid for distributing them initially.
Well, okay, but no, but yeah, I get it. But you have to look at the whole transaction, right? You have to look at the whole. I hate to use this word, but it's going to come up in this case as well. You have to look at the whole ecosystem, right? And so, if I am, if there's multiple things going on when I have a token drop like Uni, right? One, I'm using the token to incentivize people to use the protocol. I think that's what you're getting at, DeFi Advisor, and I agree. In the abstract, that one part of the overall scheme is just like any other like rebate or points program or prize or anything you give to somebody who's using your product, right? But you have to look at it in the context that like the other thing that's going on is that the people who are developing the protocol itself are getting these same tokens, right? And they're also as compensation for their labor, and they are expecting to be able to sell those tokens at some later point, to you know, as the value goes up. And so, you know, it's not. Again, I'm not saying that like the government is definitely going to win on this. I'm just saying that there's sort of enough badges that there was an overall capital raising transaction that Uniswap was a part of, that Uniswap Labs specifically was a part of, that tends to indicate that there's a securities transaction. But you know, again, and I don't want to go too far. I mean, actually, I'm happy to talk about it because I think it's interesting, and I think that a lot of people have kind of like see that through rose-colored glasses. But I actually don't view that as the like significant part of the potential litigation that Uniswap is going to be in. Not to be like a complete downer, I actually think the significant part of the Uniswap, of the potential Uniswap litigation, is the issues that Uniswap's more likely to win on. Right, these broker issues, these exchange issues, the Advisor Act issue. I think that the you know, the operation. There's some bad facts for Uniswap. There's some really good facts, right? The really good facts are the exchange. Their contracts are immutable, right? It's very clear that Uniswap Labs is not controlling an AMM, right? That they don't. It just, as a matter of fact, the government will not be able to demonstrate that Uniswap Labs has any control over what happens in an AMM. It really is an immutable peer-to-peer system, and I think that it's going to actually be quite difficult for the government to even prevail as a matter of law that they can allege that the smart contract are some type of exchange or brokerage. The front end is a little bit of a different story, and we've always kind of known that, right? Because Uniswap's always been very careful with how they deal with the front end. You cannot, as y'all know, you cannot stop anybody from using any token in a Uniswap pool, but Uniswap does have a blacklist on the front end, right? So if they say, oh, that doesn't seem like a token, that token seems like it might be a security or might be a derivative, we're not going to allow it to be traded. And you know, and then when they rolled out the fee, right, the swap fees, they were very intentional with the assets that they charge a fee on, right? And it's only assets that I think are very sort of safely assumed to be commodities. And so I think that Uniswap, they're smart guys, right? I mean they got good lawyers, and I was actually going to make a joke that they got good lawyers, unlike the ones that you guys get to come on the show, but not joke anymore. And so I think that they have some the important parts of the case are going to be pretty winnable, and I think there's a good argument in that sense that the government has what's the expression, their reach exceeded their grasp here, and they're not going to be able to get a win on like the important issues.
So just to break that down, so the hardest part for them is going to be able to classify like the AMM contracts as a securities exchange.
That's right. I think that's damn near impossible at this point.
Yeah.
It's just and if they do win on that, like shut the lights off. Right, good game. It's over.
It's over. Yeah.
Because if the Uniswap AMM is a securities exchange, so is the Ethereum network.
Yeah. So that one is the hardest. Probably won't go in the favor of the government. The questions about the front end, little dicier.
Yeah. That's I think probably more of a 50-50 kind of proposition.
And then the uni token being classified as a security.
I think the government has a stronger case on that issue. I really do. And something to think about in terms of the kind of strategic decision making that'll go into a case like this is that the people like the Hayden Adams of the world, right? The people who are who have gotten rich off of Uniswap, which I don't begrudge them for, good for them. They invented a cool project. They should get rich. They have the most personally to lose on the token as security issue, which means that there is, in spite of all the posturing that's going on right now, and I kind of roll my eyes a little bit because it's like, all right, the tweet from Hayden, it was like, you were really waiting to hit send on that one, buddy. But I think once that cools off and there's actually like a sense of like perhaps personal liability, that they may want to just sort of settle everything, including the issues that they might prevail on, in order to make sure that they don't lose their personal wealth.
But this actually means like that. Like a lot of this, okay, you're right. Like maybe they can't like prove that Uniswap is a securities exchange, and that's really like, of course, very important. But like if they give builders the feeling that they can't keep building stuff like Uniswap, so that's the point. You know what I mean? And like that's why like I really want to touch that point that you just mentioned. That like will they try to go like and personally prosecute like Hayden or other builders because they will claim that they did it like I don't know. Like,
so prosecute. And so sorry, this is a little bit technical, but I want to like make sure that I'm being clear on this. I don't think that anybody's facing any criminal liability for Uniswap. Period. It seems virtually impossible to prove that any of these guys had any kind of criminal intent in what they're doing, because it's wrong. They didn't. But what the SEC can do, one of the penalties for unregistered securities issuance is disgorgement of profits, and I think they're going to make the argument, getting back to how the unity tokenomics work. I think they are going to make the argument that the insiders like Hayden and probably some other people, their profits were their ability to sell their uni tokens into the market, and they're going to argue that those profits should be disgorged as part of the legal issuance.
It's pretty incredible.
Disgorged means that like everything should be returned. That's the meaning, though.
Disgorged means that like the idea behind disgorgement is that if you profit from an illegal securities offering, the government has an interest in dissuading future people from profiting from that same securities offering, from a similar securities offering. And so what they do is they take all the profits that you made from the securities offering. And so you look at a situation like Uniswap where it's unclear because of the airdrop and everything, like what the profits really are, my expectation is the government's going to argue that the profits are actually the sale into the secondary market
Potential sale.
by the insiders of the tokens that were airdropped.
Like that they've sold or that they could potentially sell?
That they've sold. But, you know, I don't actually know, and I'm not I'm sure that it's an answerable question that I just don't know the answer to. The extent to which the SEC has ever actually demonstrated disgorgement from secondary market sales.
You know, what I was thinking of top of mind here is the pitiful settlement between the SEC and Block One for the sale of EOS way back in the day. Block One was able to raise $4 billion through the sale of ETH for EOS during that time period. Ended up only paying $24 million in fines.
Yep. No.
That's the business model, man.
Well, yeah, but that's why that actually kind of gets to my point, Sam, about like why I think that we might not actually get answers to any of these questions through the Uniswap case, is because the government might not want to have answers on the exchange question, right? Because there's a good chance they're going to lose.
They would prefer the ambiguity.
They would prefer the ambiguity, exactly. And the downside risk for the decision makers inside Uniswap is huge for reasons that are unrelated to that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, there's actually a lot of incentive for both sides to come together and make a deal.
What's the potential of this turning out to be like the Ripple case, where we see a multi-year like litigation happening? You know,
Definitely could happen.
5 years down the road, we're still talking about this case that the SEC is pursuing against.
Could yeah, definitely within the realm of possibility. You know, because if they can't come together and make a deal, and getting back to the conversation we were having with Amanda, like a lot of it actually does come down to like who the next administration is, who's in charge of the SEC, right? If we get somebody who's in charge of the SEC who's more sympathetic to crypto, I think that they're going to be more likely to just go to Uniswap and say, all right, let's just make a deal. Let's figure out what kind of slap on the wrist we can give you, and we're all just pretend like this never happened. If we end up with Gensler again, which I don't think we will, but somebody who's him or another sort of Elizabeth Warren type person, I think it could go the other direction, where they're like, no, this is ideological. We want to win. We want to make a point. We're not going to make a deal. And if that's the case, I think it's pretty likely that 5 years from now we'll be sitting here, you know, talking about the Uniswap case, and remembering fondly that time in 2024 when we all had more hair. We saw this discussion coming a half decade later.
I think it's also very important that like we don't just be like passive and reactive about it. I think it's important that as a community, like we should kind of demand that kind of stuff and show we care about it, and like push towards like Curve Cap used to say, like call your congressman. He says that it works in America.
Yeah, what I will say about this case is that even more so than Ripple, Uniswap is heavily capitalized, has access to the best lawyers in the entire space, and
wow.
I don't think that there's anyone. I don't think that there's any DeFi protocol in the industry that has better brand equity when it comes to Uniswap. Yeah. And so
maybe.
Hmm?
I said possibly Aave, but even
no.
I agree on this one with Sam, because I think that I don't know. It's also like A16Z related Uniswap, right?
Yeah, I mean Uniswap is backed by the pretty much
like Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, aren't they? I mean, they basically have infinite money, and even setting aside
that's what I mean.
Even setting aside every motion that Uniswap files in this case, there's going to be 6 amicus briefs from Amanda at DEF, Coin Center, all the sort of usual
Congress people.
Yeah, Congress people. Everybody. You know, it is going to be in just intensely litigated case, and it's and if you think about it, actually, like from the perspective, like step outside of crypto altogether, it's actually kind of crazy that the SEC wants to put these kind of resources into fighting against Uniswap, right? Where, okay, arguably Uniswap, I mean, they say we've done trillions of dollars worth of transactions, fine. But like, you know, they're not doing it. I mean, there's plenty of actual, like in the 5 years, right? We're talking about this 5-year time frame for this case to be litigated. One thing I can guarantee, if that's the case, is that in that 5-year period, there will be several like TradFi straight up fraud scandals that got past the goalie with the SEC.
For sure, man. Such a good point. For sure.
And just the amount of resources that go into this, because, you know, Uniswap's going to have an army of lawyers working on this. And, you know, the SEC is limited in the amount of enforcement officers that they have, or enforcement lawyers. So I don't know.
They all want jobs with the law firms that are representing Uniswap.
It's like Alex said earlier, like in a way, but from the different direction. Like it's like they're trying to go for the final boss with Uniswap.
Yeah, totally. That's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
But it's not going to be that easy, because I think that one of the things that Uniswap did best was actually like fit in within the like the side that many of us are not really that fond of in crypto, like the whole Web 2 and TradFi oriented side of things, and it gives them like tremendous power now when they enter this kind of struggle.
I just wanted to end on this, Alex, and get your opinion. This is from Lawrence, Function Zero, and he says that you're once again reminded that you have a moral duty to never hire any attorney currently working for the SEC Crypto Enforcement Division after they move to the private sector. Their experience counts for naught, their credibility laughable, and their knowledge void. And
fuck yeah. That's all I got to say there.
So true. This is what I mean about being proactive or and stuff like, and not being passive. You know what I mean? Like this stuff matters, and we should really own our decisions and our actions, because we have to show what we actually demand. It's important.
Stop the revolving turnstile from.
By the way, Alex. Don't you think that really, like, it's as time goes by, more and more I can understand like how people want to build, first of all, outside the US on many aspects, or like not allow US like users and that kind of stuff, because they just want to avoid all the.
Okay. So I know what I was trying, so I hate to like.
And also, no, but also like I understand like aim on the builders more and more. Like it's. On many levels, it's so much simpler, and it has so many advantages to like be 100% anon, you know?
Oh yeah. I mean, listen, and again, I hate to like open up a whole new subject when we're on the way out, but I do think this is important. On your point, DeFi Advisor, specifically about like building offshore, there's a case, and I'd love to come back on here and talk about it sometime. The case I think that's actually like the most important case for this issue right now is actually the Richard Hart case. And it's really easy to like, hex, whatever. But like, that's actually like, he's the SEC's position in the Richard Hart case is very weak. And the motion to dismiss that Richard Hart's team filed is very strong. And it is raising a lot of these extraterritorial issues that I think are going to become so critical, assuming that we don't have some sea change in the United States with respect to how crypto is treated. The most important question, and in fact, like, look, this is the question I mostly get in my practice, is like, how do I build offshore? Okay, fine, the US doesn't want us here. How do I leave, right? How do I not be in the US? And the Richard Hart case is, I think, going to be really important to kind of get some more definitivity and clarity as to how to answer that question.
Yeah. And also I mean, I don't want to open up another box here, but we also have the Aave Eisenberg case that's going on right now.
Yeah. Oh man, I got
another.
Why not open that box as well? Like, why not?
I'm not prepared for it, and it's another episode. But
no, we should actually. Yeah, we should come back and talk about the Aave case, because like that case is also, for DeFi specifically, there's some very critical issues that are existential.
Well, I'm not buying any polls, but I think that I'm with you on that one, Alex and Richard. I really hope it goes in the right way for all of us as an industry.
I mean, it all comes back to liability, right? Like, is the Aave Eisenberg case, is he just a highly profitable trader, or was he acting maliciously and breaking the law?
Well, so here's the really interesting thing in the Aave case, and again, I'm not really prepared to talk about it either, but I think that like the really interesting facet of the Aave case is like this issue of what intent do you have to have when you go and take out a loan on chain? When I go into Aave, right, and I take out an over collateralized loan, like I deposit my ETH and I take out USDC, like almost all of us have done, I am sure. What am I agreeing to there? Am I actually agreeing that I'm going to pay back that USDC? And I think that if we get into this world, right, where when I click, confirm and I take out that USDC, if there's some implied duty that I'm agreeing to that I'm going to pay back that USDC, DeFi is fucked because like that's totally extraneous from the code. What is inside the code is I get the USDC, and if I don't pay it back under certain conditions, the ETH gets liquidated. That's the agreement. That's the whole agreement, and I think that it's sort of an ancillary part of the Aave case, but it's a very important thing, which is when Aave took out his loans on Mango, did he have fraudulent intent, or could he have fraudulent intent in taking those loans out? I just think it's
or was it even a loan? I mean, we've talked about this before about whether when you take a loan from Aave, whether it's even a loan.
Yeah,
there's no covenants.
There's no covenants. It's not like my credit card.
Yeah. What is covenants? What does it mean, covenants?
An agreement, right? Where like so when I sign up for my credit card, right, and I get my 30% APR Visa card or whatever, I'm actually, and I just through clicking a button or whatever, but I'm promising I'm going to pay that credit card, right? Whatever I put on the credit card, I'm going to pay it. And if the government can prove that when I acquired that credit card, I did so with no intent to pay the balance on the card, I've committed a crime. And so the question is that the same when I take a loan out on Aave? And I think the answer has to be no. Otherwise, what are we even doing here?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll talk about it another time when we can prepare a little bit for it. Yeah. I think we might talk about the Aave case. Once,
it's interesting.
Once it finishes up, it's currently
because I'm sorry, it's like if Aave knows, if Aave intends like to like destroy the whole protocol and like make other people lose money, like no way that should be legal. But is that exactly like what he did?
It's really the question of like code is law and what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But no, I think like we could do another hour on this, and we probably should, but probably not this morning.
Yeah, I just want to end on this before we get out. Here's a tweet from Peter Van Valkenburg saying that people who parrot Lessig's code is law maxim know that Lessig's point is that because code can be powerfully regulated or powerfully regulate individuals, it should, like regular law, be democratically accountable and therefore regulated. In many ways, code is law is anti-free speech.
Yeah.
So we'll end it there.
All right, cool. Well, thanks as always for having me on, guys. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And also thanks, Amanda, for coming on, and you too, DeFi Advisor. Make sure to come to Leviathan News. We have the Squid Cave, which you guys can join. Submit headlines, earn some squid points. And
and if you've ever been on the show also, like talk to us. Let's get your addresses in, and really come to the Squid Cave. It's funner than I thought it.
And you can also come to pods.media and mint this podcast as an NFT and earn some squid as well too. So thanks so much, everybody.
And we're on Farcaster, you said as well, right?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out Farcaster.
All right, guys.
All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you.